Hey, again, thanks for joining us. You said something that really caught my imagination, which is we're on the precipice of, the way I think you phrased it was, we're on a precipice with the tools that we have today. Can you explain what you meant? This was in the context of responsible computing. What did you mean by responsible computing and that idea about the tools we have today?
So let's think of it this way, right? If you're a young person coming up nowadays, you are born with a phone in your hand. You have that phone. You have the capability to communicate with anybody. You can do so kindly. You can do unkindly. But you also have a responsibility to make sure that you watch your digital footprint. Now, we talk a lot about sustainability in this industry and making sure that our data centers are sustainable and we take care of stranded power and all that kind of stuff. But we're in this industry, do we talk to students and say, hey, do you know how much power you're using when you send that snap? Do you know how much power you're using when you do this Google search? Do you know how much power you're using if you do an AI search, and how much different that power consumption is? And as we're talking about digital footprints, do we talk to students and say, hey, this is what you're doing, as part of this technology that you're using? And granted, there's a convenience factor, but there's also some things that you could do away with, and we hear this all the time, especially as people get older, with time management. I don't have enough time to do this. I don't have enough time to do that. How much time did you spend flipping through your phone? Because there's some time to be had back, right? We all know that. So I think as we get more native with our computing resources and more native with technology, we also have to do a little bit of that mirror economics and figure out what we're doing. Are we putting forward good things? Because we're creating the data that's going to shape what everybody else learns from tomorrow. Because that's the way AI works, right? We're composing all of our digital selves. We're letting people know where we are, what we do, who we interact with, who we've been around. All of those things become part of your digital persona that lives in a data center that lives about all of us. So we really need to think a little bit broader about, what is that footprint I'm leaving? What am I putting out there in word, in deed, in action, in tracking, in any of those things, and in power to support my lifestyle, and how much of that is critically necessary? So that's kind of where I was going with that. I think we have a disconnect because we talk all the time about how much power, data centers are going to be 10% of the world's power. It's going to be this, it's going to be this, but then we don't ever go back and say, but we could be a little more responsible about how we use this technology too.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree. I found it's less for me about that 10%. If that 10% were solving cancer, if that 10% were spectacular good, well, then that's a small price to pay. Unfortunately, I think to your point, the 10% is usually whatever the percentage is. There's a lot of frivolousness and waste that's not leading to human flourishing. It's just, at the very least, occupying our time, or in the worst scenarios, consuming resources that are leading to all these things we say that we're against. Back to your point about sustainability or whatever it is, we're just consuming resources because we don't see a direct impact in our day-to-day.
But there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason that people give us these platforms for free, because we're their currency, right? We are their data. We are what they mine. They can figure out habits. They can, it's all very actionable, sellable information. Years ago, I was speaking on a panel in London, and there was with a distinguished fellow from one of the large hyperscalers there on stage with me, and he was talking about some of the things that they were doing, and they bought, 100,000 or so anomalized identities, things from one of the carriers, and then they matched it up with Facebook likes, and with over 99% certainty, they identified every person on that list.
Yeah.
So I think people don't realize, as you leave your digital footprint, I had this conversation with somebody the other day about, somebody had asked me about, well, is it true that some countries are mining information? Yes, all countries are mining information, including our own, right?
Sure.
That's part of it. And so I think you have to be responsible about what you put out there. It's kind of like, I was telling people the other day, if you can picture everywhere that you've ever left a business card, including business cards that you gave other people to hand out on your behalf. Now, what if you had to go back and collect all of those business cards? Holy free holy, we wouldn't know how to do that, right? And we can't do that with our digital footprints either. So I'm not saying that technology is bad. I'm just saying that I think we need to be more responsible. And I think we also really have to plug into understanding that just because it came out of a computer, it's not true, right? I think critical thinking is going to be the next new frontier in this industry, and people really being able, because we have to, right? We have AI now that processes information at amazing speeds, but we don't know how those large language models were adapted. We don't know where that information came from that they trained on. We don't know if it was accurate, if it was inaccurate, if it's a hodgepodge. Garbage in, garbage out happens. It just happens much faster in its scale with AI. Throwing quantum computing, it's going to get even worse, right? So I think as we build all of these things, we have to almost take a break sometimes and say, how much of this is really for the common good? How much of this is doing something positive? How much of this is sowing hate? Look at kids today with social media and the problems that it's caused with, self-esteem and issues that some of the countries are now banning it under the age of 13. It affects, attention spans, a lot of things. So I don't think computing is wrong. I just think we have to be more responsible and really more, I guess, purposeful about how we use it and for what.
How do you help the audiences to think, one, the need to think critically, and two, critically think?
Okay, so here's a great exercise, and this works every time. And I've tried this with lots of people. So when you have your phone, you see something negative. Doesn't matter if it's a side you agree on or the other side.
Right.
You see that it's negative, put your phone upside down for 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Okay.
That seems like an eternity if you're used to scrolling. But then you pick your phone back up. If you see something negative, back down for 10 minutes. Now, what you're doing is you're conditioning yourself. You're conditioning the algorithms that you're not going to interact with that nasty, rotten behavior, right? Your feet straightens out. Your mind straightens out, right? You shed a lot of that negativity and you shed a lot of that. And what you do is you start really recognizing those bad posts. And so as you look through it, you start reading, you start thinking, oh, adjectives, adverbs, these are things that are, definitely designed to sway somebody to think your way or another way. I mean, look how many, during the election, how many people they thought they were going to solve the world problem with a stupid meme. It happens all the time, right?
Right.
But if you see that negativity, put it down. And so what you do after a couple of weeks, you start really conditioning yourself to only interact with positive things. You retrain the algorithms that you're only going to interact with positive things, and you start identifying some of that negative stuff. And so what happens is you change your behavior, you change your attention span, you change your patience level, you change the way that you interact with that media, and some of the stuff that you thought was kind of important, you start realizing how much negativity that's building in your workforce, just like that burrito, right? You could eat those burritos today if you wanted to eat those burritos. You'd still have the same problems you had years ago. The difference is now you have trained yourself to know, hey, said burrito might not be the best diet food out here, right?
Yeah.
Might not be, especially if you smother it in chili and sauce and sour cream and all that good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you can eat a smaller burrito. You can eat one with the right amount of food. You can eat a burrito with the right food in it, and it's probably going to be very good for you and sustaining. So we have to train ourselves to do the same way, but we're not really conditioned to do that. Nobody tells us to do that. Nobody says, hey, look, here's technology. For all the goodness, there's some badness, and here's the proper way to use it. We learn how to use a mixer. We learn how to use a lawnmower. We learn how to use a chainsaw. Nobody says, here's the right way to use social media. Here's the right way to use technology. And I think that's where we really have to start stepping up with our responsibility, helping our kids do a better job, helping even grown-ups do a better job, and be better stewards of data ourselves with not perpetuating stuff that we know to be false, we know to be wrong, cruel, meanness, all those good things,
Right.
Try to make it a more positive environment. But it's something that's, you have to actively look for those things, because I think what happens is, just like anything else in life, we get stuck in a rut. We get stuck doing this and stuck doing that. And you kind of forget that you have to do a little mirror economics and retune your body and retune your brain every so often to do the right thing.
Well, let's just leave it at that. How do we leverage these tools to help us train as we're learning skills, how we can develop our brain and train the algorithms so that it leads to human flourishing?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few fronts, right? one, I think as parents, we have to do the right thing. A lot of parents just throw a phone in their kid's hand and let them go to town.
Right.
That's not a great idea.
Right. It's
The internet
pouring
is a
out that
scary
it's not.
place, just
It
for the
is.
record.
Yeah.
So, years and years and years ago, when we were trying to get the internet approved for data, we were in front of the FCC and having conversations with them. And, they said there's no entertainment on the internet. And of course, we had to prove that. And back in the day, there, to be fair, was not much.
Right.
And now it's, it is the main form of a lot of entertainment.
Right.
But you can, as a parent, you can put up parental guardrails. There's lots of those kind of things, as a parent. But I think part of it is just having those conversations, right? We teach kids to code. That's most kids' first exposure to technology is coding. And a few things happen here, right? We teach how to make a computer do what we want it to do. And so we can take that and we can say, okay, now, what happens if we take this program that we've just written and we put meanness in it? What happens if we take this program and we put kindness in it? We can have some of those kind of lessons using the tools that we have. It's a matter of finding where those guardrails are, and every parent's going to be different. There are parents that homeschool their kids because they don't find public school guardrails to be enough. Those are your guardrails. You can set those as you want. But I also think when we do that and we start teaching that to kids as a form of technology, we're also teaching them how to interact with technology. And that's a big chunk of the lesson that's been missing for a whole time. And so now, when kids go to school and they learn about coding, we can teach how to code better things. How would you improve this? We can make these exercises in critical thinking. You have to know both sides of the story. I mean, think about it. You're a parent. I'm a parent. There's always going to be times as a parent where you punish your kids for stuff they didn't do. And there's going to be times they get away with stuff they probably should have been punished for. And as parents, we're like, well, hell, it's going to work out in the wash, right? But if we start doing that same kind of thing with those exercises, here's technology. We use technology. You can use it for your homework. You can't use it for this. There's a reason that they've just relaunched phones that have no apps on them, that are just phones. And it's for what you said. I want my kid to be able to communicate. When we were growing up, we didn't carry a phone around. We got around just fine.
Right.
Right? We played out at night until it was dark. I think all of those things can still be true. The trick is that it's become a matter of convenience, I think, for a lot of people. And convenience definitely is something that is not always beneficial to society. It tends to make us lazy. It tends to keep us from thinking. It tends to, it's spoon-fed. And to your point, if you get so lost up in the world of only things you agree with, you're going to realize you're being fed bad information, but it seems plausible because you're in an echo chamber. And you can't do that in business. You can't do that in life. So we really have to kind of take that on and do some of that. And I think, the other thing with teaching kids coding, and part of the problem with that is that coding is a very specific skill set. I don't know. Have you ever written code?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you love it?
Hated it.
Right. So if we teach kids coding and that's their only exposure to technology and they hate to code, they're going to assume that they want nothing to do with tech as they get older. Right. And unfortunately, with a lot of young kids, that's how we're losing them in tech. We're losing them because something's been cruel. It's, something has been, it's too unkind for them to interact with. We haven't taught them how to do it the right way, or we've only set up certain things for them to see. And I think as consumers, we have to do a better job of picking the right car, right? There's a million cars you can go buy. We all have one we like for whatever reason that is. And we have to do the same thing with our technology and be responsible. And I think, too, that we have to make sure that we introduce technology careers to our kids at a very young age, because the more varied people we have in technology, the better technology is going to work for everybody. You can call it diversity, you can call it whatever you want. It's just a different thought process. If you take 10 people of very different backgrounds, put them in a room and say, here's a problem, how are you going to solve it? Or if you say, you take those 10 kids and you teach them that problem and teach them how to solve it, the outcomes are going to be two very exponentially different outcomes, right? Yeah. So I think we have to realize that technology is a tool. We have to use it for the tool that it's supposed to be and that it's intended for. But we have to have that training. We have to make sure it's not, we're not handing a chainsaw to somebody and saying, here you go. And I think the other thing too, you talked about the elderly, and I just taught a cybersecurity class for the elderly last Thursday, believe it or not. And one of the things we talked about, in our generation, most of us grew up. I'll be 64 here in less than a month, but one of the things that we grew up, we didn't lock our doors,
Right.
we didn't lock our cars, we trusted people. And you carry that forward to technology where so much untrustworthy behavior can happen. And a lot of people just don't even know to look for it, right? They just assume that that's the way it's going to be. So I think, all of that, those guardrails that you talk about, whether they're this wide or they're this wide, somebody's got to be minding the guardrails. They're not going to go up and down by themselves. And I think, part of it's what we choose to tolerate. Part of it's what we choose to expose our kids to. Part of it's, it's going to be different for different families. But I think just having those classes on, when the internet first came out, I taught a class on PBS years ago, Internet for Parents, because the kids came home from school understanding computers and the parents knew nothing.
Right.
And so how do you know where your kid's been? How do you know what they're looking, how do you improve that? How do you make that tool better for them in their future if it's not in your purview and you've never used one before? If you think it's going to chew your arm off up to the elbow, it's going to be very different for your kid. So, I think all of those things need to happen at the same time. And I think also as a tech community, as we do community outreach to make the communities happier about where our data centers are and that kind of stuff, those are great programs. Take a boys club troop or a Girl Scout troop or whatever, Talk to them about technology. Talk to them about the safety rails. Talk to them about what critical thinking is. I think these are new classes that are going to come up. And I think with AI, it's just going to be so much more critical just because of the speed of information.
When technology can be leveraged, and I think you are as well. I am a technology optimist. Technology can do amazing things, has done amazing things, will do amazing things. But it's an amplifier. And if we don't allow it to amplify the truth, we just have it amplify a narrative, more often than not, we just end up in trouble with it.
Well, any echo chamber is dangerous, right? If you surround yourself only with 4 people that think like you, you're going to have a very boring ass life. You're not going to grow. You're not going to flourish. You're not going to learn. You're not going to, there'll be things that could have a direct impact on your life you're probably not even going to know about till it's a surprise, right?
Right.
I do think I'm definitely all about technology. I think there's so much good that we can do with technology. I think we just barely scratched the surface. Mm-hmm. But I do think as we're building this technology, we as technologists in the industry have an onus on us to make sure that we're capturing and doing the right thing with that technology. We should not be wasting resources on something that's harmful.
Yeah. Most people that I meet outside of our small world of data centers have absolutely no idea what a data center, until just a few years ago, they didn't even know what a data center was. And in the last few years, there's a lot of, I would say misinformation, but there's a lot of data center in the news headlines about declaring what it may or may not be. So when we are trying to attract people of any age, of any skill level, of any experience to come and evaluate the industry, if nothing else, just to inform themselves, but hopefully to get engaged, because there's so much opportunities. And I believe you and I think this way, that that it's one of the most impactful industries in the world that helps human beings flourish. You've got to have affordable, safe, available power, and it's got to be connected. And if those things are true, then they connect us to data and to each other and through these things, and that's where the intersection of data centers is. So how do you help people to bridge that gap? One, to introduce them to what's a data center. 2, demystify either the technology or the misinformation they may have formed, if they have any concept at all, and then connect it to it. And then I suppose the next thing would be, you should evaluate it. I don't care if you're in legal. I don't care if you're a porter, security, an electrician, whatever it is, a coder. There's opportunities to influence or to use these things to magnify. How do you capture people's imagination and bridge that gap?
Well, years ago, I mean, we kind of shot ourselves in our own feet collectively, I suppose, because for years you were not allowed to talk about where a data center was. It was all not secret spy, quiet
Right.
thing, because it was a risk.
Right.
And so when we hushed up about ourselves, we hurt ourselves. And I'm of the age, I'm sure you were the same way. We all fell into this industry.
Right.
And unfortunately, college curriculum has not kept up. So what happens when a kid's going through a college yearbook or whatever, trying to figure out what they want to do, data centers isn't in there. Engineering's in there, coding's in there, MIS is in there. There's a few other, computer science is in there, but nothing that's really data centers. So there's a few capstone projects. There's one program over in Nova. There's a couple others. And we're actually working now on creating some national apprenticeships for some of the data center positions. But there's 300 jobs I put in my book that are directly related to the industry, and people just don't know they're there. Now, Loudoun County probably has a good job because there's a lot of data centers in Loudoun County. It's the capital in the world. But go to any city, there's no building you look at that doesn't have some component of a data center in it, or maybe even several data centers in it, or maybe the whole building is data centers. But we don't talk about it because it was always been a risk. So I think we need to do a few things. One, we need to make sure that we start having specialties for data centers. Even if it's a minor in college, the terms have to be out there. We have to, people have to understand. People also need to understand that we all live in a data center. Whether you think you do or not, you have digital twins all over the place. And if you want to protect your data, you should understand how it gets there, and you should understand what those ramifications are. And I think, hitting technical merit badges, getting kids involved earlier, reaching out to all the trades. There's a huge component of my books that focus just on the trades. Probably 80% of our jobs don't require a degree. And so why aren't we introducing these to kids? You can get in there under an apprenticeship if you want your degree. A lot of these big companies will pay for it. So now you've got an apprenticeship, you're working in a job, you can get your degree, all of it's funded while you're making great money. And I think, we need to reach out to students more. A friend of mine wanted to go talk to her kids' class about data centers. She's got two little ones, 8 and 6, I think they were at the time. And she went to the class, talked about data centers, and the teacher said, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. It's not on the approved curriculum. But here, you can read this book to the class about farts. True story, right? Why would we do that? So, and that's exactly where the children's book came from too, by the way. But we have to, every kid interacts with one. Every parent interacts with one, but most parents don't know what they are because we kind of skipped a generation. We went from the generation of the builders to now we're dragging in students, from other places just like we did. And keep in mind, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh my God, I have to be so technical to get into the data center world, you don't. There's a million people that will help you, train you, teach you. That's how we all learn. Mm-hmm. So don't think it's like we're all sitting up here on our high horses thinking we know everything you guys don't know. Because somebody took that time to show all of us too, because we grew with the industry. You go to trade shows, you go to events, you figure out how things work, what the new technology is, lather, rinse, repeat. It's still the same way. Everything old gets reinvented. It comes back in a better form. We do better things, but we don't really highlight that in schools. And unless you happen to be in one of the big kind of data center cities, data centers don't typically get a lot of focus, even though they exist in every classroom. So part of that is apprenticeships. Part of that is working with, educators, homeschool communities. Here's some, here's jobs. Here's what data centers do. Here's how you live in a data center. And we just have more work to do. There's no one short, simple solution, I don't think, but we definitely have more work to do. And it's unfortunate because the ones that can carry that message forward tend to be the ones that are busiest at their job.
Right.
So it doesn't always work that way either, but but it's all part of it.
All of my children are girls, and there is a concern about, real or imagined, that if I go into an industry that seems to be predominantly male, or I don't come to it from a trades perspective, I don't have any background in that, am I going to fit? What's the churn rate? What's the ability if I want to be a mom, or I have these differences than being a guy? Will I fit in there? And I try to appeal to them. My head of pre-development and construction is a woman from Georgia Tech, super smart, super capable. Plenty of people like Carrie that are in and around Nancy Novak over at Compass. Like we've got big public faces of that, but that's a second barrier to them. Well, I might believe all the things that you've said are true, Dad. I don't know that it's a place for a person like me. How do you, both in the macro of just that audience in general, and then for women in particular, explain what this world is, why there might be opportunity, and maybe even educate operators like us on why we should help to solve that problem? And then two, for women in particular, to come to investigate and explore this industry, to see if they can find a home there.
So that was actually part of the reason that I wrote the first book. The attrition rate at the time for women in technology was 67%.
Wow.
Not that left their job, that left an entire industry. And to me, I thought that was criminal, because here you are with a very applicable skill set and understanding that could translate into a whole bunch of other jobs. There's like 300 in the book, right?
Right.
And so I personally think that we have to have a component of male and female, because we think about things in a different way. We're built differently. We're wired differently. Say whatever you want. 100% if you're married, you know that's true. Mm-hmm. And so, or even just in your daily interactions, right? So I think we have to do, for women in the industry, a lot of it, from where I started 40 some odd years ago in this industry to where we are today, the one thing that has moved the needle 100% more than anything else is grassroots. It's women reaching out to other women. I run networking calls. There's other women that do that. There's organizations that have WIMCO chapters or chapters just for women. And, if there's a trade show and I'm at a trade show, I do a newbie walk. Start of every trade show. If you're new to the industry, come tell me what you do. We'll walk around. We'll look at every one of these booths. I'll tell you what it does, how it interfaces with you, whether this is good for your job to know these people, not good for your job to know these people. And then you start building the ecosystem. And the problem we have, and you could say from an operator perspective, or even take some of your vendors, right? Your vendor comes in and calls on you, and they're selling widget A. Mm-hmm. Everything about widget A. You want to ask them about widget A? That's your person.
Right.
Ask them about widget B. Deer in the headlights. And
Right.
So one of the things that I started doing early on was teaching data centers. And I've taught, I can't tell you how many hours of data center training over my career, even though I was an SE, it wasn't really part of my job, but it just, to me, going on sales calls and stuff with salespeople, and then when the conversation gets to something else, they kind of get that deer in the headlights. How criminal. Right. How do you set anybody else up for success that way? So, a lot of it is understanding, a lot of it is exposure, a lot of it's just taking the time to do that. And I think just culturally and differently, guys talk to guys different than they talk to girls. Mm-hmm. And same thing with us. We talk to ourselves different than, we talk to our male counterparts. And I also think there's some things that really hurt us. I think the Me Too movement hurt us because there's a lot of men that don't want to work with women now, which is stupid. If you can't sort that out, you shouldn't be working with women anyway. The Me Too was certainly part of it. There's things with women being able to be on board seats and recognizing women in higher up positions. We don't have enough women in top positions. But the biggest problem is how we recruit. 85% of our jobs are filled with networking. 15% of jobs get filled through applicant tracking systems. So how are we getting to those people? If you're a bunch of guys hanging out with a bunch of guys shooting golf, you probably don't have women in your circle. And so when you're recommending people for these jobs and you're bringing people into your organization, they might not be, women. So I think we all kind of have this duty to fall out of our comfort zone a bit. Not that it's, and be a little intentional about falling out of our comfort zone. I also think that we really have to get HR on board and making sure that we have realistic expectations for jobs that actually align with the job expectation. Not every job requires a 4-year degree. I saw one on LinkedIn not long ago where they wanted somebody with a master's degree starting pay at $15 an hour. Fight me, who is going to do that?
Right.
And so if we keep setting people up for that kind of failure, and, in job descriptions, it's been proven that women will only apply to a job if they feel like they're 100% qualified. Whereas men, if they hit about 60%, they'll throw in an application.
Yeah.
And now you start changing keywords and adding keywords. And then the other thing I think that really hurt women was this whole talking about how, what do they call imposter syndrome, right? I think imposter syndrome is healthy. If you're having a little apprehension about what you're going to do in your day, face it. Why are you apprehensive? That is a magic learning opportunity. That is a magic way to propel yourself forward. Don't just sit there and go, oh, I feel like I'm risen too high because now I got to a tough spot. Screw it. I have imposter syndrome. You can't do that. Mirror economics, to quote the great Terry Bradshaw, is some of the best thing that you can do. Hit that head on. Why do you feel that way? Stop trying to put us in a victim place and get yourself out of that victim place. Put yourself where you belong. I mean, there's nobody on this planet that doesn't deserve an amazing livelihood, and it's yours if you reach for it and find it. I think that we need to do a better job of kind of, highlighting those kids when they start out very young, want to be in tech, and that it disappears by the time they're 8 or 9, especially for girls. Why is that? What is that message we're putting forward? And right now, I think it's even worse for these kids coming out. To your point, we've got kids who, for 2 years during COVID, they're go to work with mom and dad day, watching their parents cuss a laptop at the dining room table.
Right.
So, we have to, kind of on all fronts, we have to expose people. We have to support people. I think, some of the companies do a great job when they hire a new employee, they immediately give them a mentor that's a seasoned employee. That's a great concept. I mean, there's a lot of these great concepts. I think if you bring them to fruition, they'll work. But, without exposure, I mean, you work in a data center. I spoke to 1,500 kids not long ago. I said, how many of you know what a data center is on the first one? One kid raised their hand. I said, who do you know that works in a data center? My dad.
my poor kids, one of my daughters loves what she does. She works at an organization. She loves this part of her job where they receive goods from people that are trying to resell them. And so they come in, these are high-end goods usually, and they go through her station, and she's responsible for evaluating, one, is it what the person that wants to redo it says it is?
Right.
What condition is it in? How would we categorize it? Do we keep it? Do we get rid of it, et cetera? She loves it. And what she found is a love for a couple things. Process and procedure. She loves metrics. It blew my mind. She loves really strong parameters. I want to know how I'm going to be rewarded. I do not perform well in that situation. I'm just sort of, Will Ferrell with the cowbell, work the space. That's me. And she is show me the notes on the paper and I'll do it. And I'll do a little improv or whatever. But I want to know the stuff. And me, I just want to know what the chords are and how much time do we got? And maybe I'll stay on time. And so I was trying to talk to her about data centers, and she's like, well, I don't have any, just our critical infrastructure. It doesn't have to be, spot on data centers. She's like, well, I don't have any training in that. I was like, here is my path. And I'm not going to belabor it, but when I was in my early 30s, I figured out how to build gaming computers because I played some games with some friends, which I never thought I would like. My whole family's from computers and aerospace and NASA and whatever, zero interest for me. Until I figured out, I have, one, I like playing those games, and two, I have an aptitude for building. I don't know why I could read a book on firewalls. I don't know why I could do that. I just can, and it came together. Could just do Novell, could do all the things. Later, IPX, SPX, and all that stuff. Yeah, back in the day, Banyan Vine. My brain came together. Showed me one time, I got it. I don't know why. It just was. First time really in a long time, other than being a class clown, that I could actually do something technical. And so I remember I got an opportunity to build computers for the University of Texas in Galveston, and then they needed Novell administrators. They said, hey, can you do that? Well, I didn't go into detail with them, but I knew how to set up a LAN to play Doom. I was like, of course I do. I know all about it. Are you a Novell administrator? Well, I mean, I play the role of a novella administrator, and they're like, close enough or whatever. To your
Stayed
point,
at Holiday Inn Express last night.
exactly. I didn't even stay at the Holiday Inn Express. I stayed at Ted's Express. But because they were going to pay me the ridiculous amount of money of $35,000 a year, and I figured out. So in the courting process, I was super excited, and then I got the job, and I was terrified. What am I going to do? Ironically, to this conversation, I reached out to 2 or 3 people on campus who were all women that had just recently gotten out of the Navy, who were very interested in helping me. Because their personality and their instinct was, look, I've been struggling before, and the guys were my competitors. I didn't even realize it at the time, but they're like, I'm either busy or I'm competitive, or I don't want you to know I'm vulnerable. I don't know what dark fiber is. I don't know what these other things are. Back to differences between men and women in the broad. I have 3 daughters. I have 4 female pets. I have a wife of 38 years. I'm not an expert because I'm always in trouble with them. But I have I go out into my shed, hammer things, drill. I don't build anything. I just make a lot of noise, start my dirt bikes up, whatever. But my point is that, and to be honest, I cry way more at every rom-com than they ever did. My wife's like, oh, brother, please, Anyway, I say this to say when I'm trying to talk to my daughter about investigate this, she's like, I have no practical experience. Look, honey, you know how to do quality control. You know how to work off of a metric. You like to be part of, she likes to be part of a team where there's not a lot of individual interaction. She's very introverted, but she likes to be part of a team where we're recognized and rewarded as a whole, but I can play my station.
Yep.
And if I can understand my station, I could play my station. Carrie, she's already had to have hip surgery because the job that she has now, she stands 12 hours a day, 4 days a week for, $20 an hour or whatever. And when I first got out of the Army, was a manager of a honey baked ham. It worked every holiday, crazy hours, 60, 70 hours for pennies. Everybody's got to go through their baptism of fire. I am not anti these teach you how to serve jobs in or just out of school at all. But once you learn what you have a strong aptitude for, and you know your personality type, how do we connect you to a thing that is that's going to sustain you professionally, intellectually, or whatever for the rest of your career? Probably like you, I've had to pivot a number of times within my industry. Sometimes it was my idea to pivot. Sometimes people helped pivot me when I didn't want to.
Right.
And I'm not petite. I am not, svelte on your feet like you are. It took, they call it cow tipping in the farm world. Like they had to knock me in one direction or the other. But I'm just trying to capture their imagination, and it baffles me because I come from let's just try it. At 33, I was broke. Houses had been repoed. Cars had been repoed. Plenty of mistakes for 10 years. And then found that intersection of aptitude and attitude. And it was literally like a rocket ship and has been ever since. And many times people outside of me recognize a better place for me. Some of them my leaders or whatever. So that for me, I don't just mean it for young women in their 30s or 20s, but just to people to, 1, capture their interest, and 2, get them to just investigate and try. And then the burden is on our industry, which, by the way, except for you and me, most of them are introverted engineers, to get them to embrace this group. We'll all say the same things from the stage. We need to embrace these groups. But very few people actually, if we're being generous, have the understanding or the ability on what does that mean? Like I've got to step it out of my own personal comfort zone to embrace this group of people and help get them connected to a workstation that makes sense. And now I can lead to my organization flourishing and their flourishing.
Well, the basics. A data center tour goes a long way. And I was talking to, because I do a lot of work getting veterans into the industry too.
Amen.
No, people don't realize, but our veteran community is some of the best construction force out there. Mm-hmm. But and other things too. And I was talking to this one recruiter that does a lot of work with veterans, and he said, "Oh yeah, we tried to we got a veteran into a data center job, and he said he was bored out of his mind and hated it." I said, "Okay, well you got him in the wrong job then."
Right.
I mean, there's everything. So this industry, I think what people don't realize is people assume if you work in a data center that you're some kind of a technical role. there's sales, there's engineering, there's marketing, there's logistics, there's purchasing, there's procurement, there's human resources, there's, you name it. There's an entire, I mean, I counted 300 no sweat for this book. Salespeople, business development, event planners, there's, all of that. And this industry is not going away. There's, my grandma told me, or my grandpa told me years and years ago, there's 3 professions that will never go away. Anything in technology, he was an engineer for Westinghouse, anything in medical, and morticians.
It's a challenge, I think, just sometimes to capture the imagination of somebody not related to critical infrastructure, kind of to snap them out of a fog to consider the possible. It's one of the hardest things we have in front of us.
Well, I mean, that's because it's new and it's changed and there's lack of exposure, right? So if you can fix those 3 things, then everything else changes, because people are scared of what they don't understand. And they're definitely scared, if you've ever had something disappear out of a device, tech just became a scary place for you because you don't know how to get it back. You don't know how to fix it, right? You don't necessarily know how to ask your bot on your phone. I would say one of their names, but they'd probably listen anyway. How to figure out how to work those things out. And I think a lot of that is just people talking and people working together, and certainly exposure. But we have to do a much better job when somebody joins this industry of making sure they understand the entire ecosystem. And I think that's one area where we really fail. Companies teach the solution that they have, but they don't teach the ecosystem. And so what happens when you take somebody in that scenario and then they go talk to a new customer, when the conversation shifts a little bit, now they're excluded because they don't understand what else is going on somewhere else in that ecosystem that they're involved in. And so I think if we start doing that broad generalist to everybody that joins a team, right? So there's companies that use my book to train new employees because it's a good general background. You can read it in a weekend kind of thing, but it does explain the concept. So then now you've got something that's not overly technical, explaining something that's technical. So it takes some of that pressure off. It takes some of the heat off. And then I think making sure that we mentor people and put people with more seasoned people. We're about to have a huge gray tsunami, as they call it in this industry, where people like us that grew up in this industry, that developed this industry as we grew, we're going to retire out. And that knowledge has to be transferred. And, granted, stuff changes, but the basics and the principles don't change. They're the same all the way through. And I think it's just a matter of finding the right people, doing better jobs with colleges and universities. It's a shame that curriculum runs this slow. And I honestly think that jobs in our industry might be the one thing that breaks our college system. Because we have AI that can teach, we have people that can teach, companies are quickly bringing on their own training departments. AI can fill in for some of the skills we don't need. And let's be fair, that's the first real round for AI outside of information gathering and spewing forth that information. The real first round of AI is getting rid of the mundane. Right. If I'm going to program AI to do something for me, it's going to be all the crap I hate.
Right.
Right? It's going to be that minutia, that day in, day out, repeatable stuff that's very easy to take care of.
Right.
And then that frees the mind for more strategic things. So what if you, for a company, took somebody from your purchasing department, somebody from your networking department, somebody from your server department, maybe your storage team, maybe HR, maybe real estate, and put them together and said, what do you think our next best thing would be? That's going to be a very different solution than if you go to the networking guy and say, what's the next greatest thing going to be? He's going to tell you whatever Cisco or their preferred vendor has on the roadmap, right? And not necessarily how to apply that. And I think when we start pulling all of those minds in together, we get something very different. Look at neurodiverse people, right? They're not going to go to college in many cases. Some of them will, for sure. But in a lot of cases, it's not in their purview. Now, does that mean that they don't have a job in our industry and that their life brings no value and there's nothing they can contribute? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Because we need people on the validation. We need people to do user testing. We need people to do customer service remotely. Maybe that's a great job for you. We need all of that. But in order for people to be successful at those jobs, we have to give them that ability to flourish. And we have to give them the knowledge to make those decisions. And I think in a lot of cases, we're still we're still at that impasse where knowledge is very siloed, it's very funneled, and really it's coming from the small end of the funnel, and it should be coming from the big end of the funnel.
I don't disagree. One of the groups that I would add, as you were running that list out, I love that list. We would add, accidentally, I discovered this, logistics. The people that are received, because you build a data center, you got it operating. What changes the most are these environments that come and go. And in our data center academy, we have almost none of these participants have any data center experience. In fact, almost none of them have real technology experience. The closest might be they're a YouTuber or something like that. But they don't have what we would normally think of this. So in going through these courses where they're learning how to rack and stack, and they're learning about electrons and molecules and packet fabric or packets moving across fiber, they spend a little time in the logistics, whether in this case the shipping area or whatever. And one of the things we encourage them to say, so long as it is with curiosity and not arrogance, well, why do we do that?
Yeah.
And not ad nauseum, but why do we do that? Because many times that first answer, I would say 70% of the time, maybe even more, is, well, here's why. But 15 to 20% of the time, well, what do you mean by that? Why? Well, if the trucks come in like this, you're right. But whatever it is, well, if I'm just thinking out loud that if the trucks came in and you did it this way, or at this time, or in this manner, or with 2 people for 2 hours instead of 1 person for 8 hours, wouldn't it work kind of like this? And I'm telling you, Carrie, 2 or 3 times we've said,
Imagine that. Sometimes it's the stupidest question that provides the smartest answer, without a doubt. And it's the people that don't understand that will ask those processes, right? If you write code, the best person to check your program is somebody that knows nothing about it.
Right.
Nothing. The ones that know how it's supposed to work and what it's supposed to do will skip all those accidental steps that highlights all the bugs and highlights where the problems are.
Yeah. John Trout, who owns Check Hub, made me laugh on a podcast we did not long ago. I've had him on a few times. He's pretty smart and capable. He said, look, we're testing our own tool with LLMs. We love the interaction of LLMs when done good. We know an LLM can be used not for good. You've talked about that before. But in this case,
large language models and lousy language models.
Yeah, exactly right. But in this case, he said he was trying to demonstrate a point to a group of people. And he said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write me up a method or procedure to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Just write it down, start to finish, and we're going to follow your routine exactly right. So everybody writes up how to make whatever. And then you hand the method to the person, and you cannot do anything intuitively. Yeah. You have to follow it exactly. It went, as you can imagine, hilariously sideways pretty much the entire time. And then they took an LLM that had been trained, was not just random information, and it was 99.9% right. And so he just showed, he wasn't trying to say this replaces that. He was saying an untrained LLM, it's gonna be like a golden retriever puppy.
Yeah.
It knows to fetch. You throw it a stick. If it gets out there and can't find the stick, it's going to bring you something back. And if you're not an expert on what the stick looks like, it's going to hallucinate, but you won't know it's hallucinating, right? You're just going to say, oh, look, it brought it back. Could be a snake. Could be, who knows what it is, right? But if that animal's trained, it will keep hunting until it finds the stick, or it's going to come back empty-handed and said, I couldn't find what you sent me. You did something wrong because I'm trusting you. Same thing with that process and procedure. And where I was trying to capture, kind of tying this back to where we were before, hey, do you like to solve problems? Like whether it's solving how you ingress fashion designer stuff or racks into infrastructure or whatever it is. If the thing that brings joy to your heart is organizing things that are in chaos, I guarantee you if I go to my customers and say, hey, we're going to train these new people, they don't have any of this background, but they want to get your stuff organized and your electrons moving in the soonest amount of time so that they're providing whatever benefit you've contracted with me, and they want to do it in a safe and a sustainable way, they'd be like, all in. We'll help fund their training. Let's make that happen. And it'll be an outside the box. So anyway, these are the opportunities I think that are in front of us. But you just got to.
But we also, to your point though, all of those trainings are good, but you got to get the people in the door. And I
Yes, for
honestly
sure.
think that we have such a huge opportunity for human resources across the board to step up and start doing something different. They, I think in some cases, HR has taken the human out of HR.
Yeah.
It's not human resources anymore. They're busy doing a million other things. We have to get the people in the door, and we have to have the time, to train them. And when I was a consultant, which I was for the majority of my career, there's always times where you had to have a certification to work on a particular. I've had 40 some odd certifications over the years because of that. But there's always times that you have to add something or do something different, or there's something that's going to challenge you a little bit, something that you're going to have to learn. But I think what we don't do as companies, we get so focused on what we do that we forget there's other people that we have to train and bring in just to sustain ourselves. Because, what would you do if 10% of your workforce resigned? It's a very real thing, right? With the Great Tsunami, it's probably going to happen. 10% are going to retire. Do you have 10% of people to replace them? Have you not already taken somebody and said, hey, look, out of our organization, we would love for you to spend 5 hours a week shadowing somebody in a different department. I used to do the same thing you were talking about with the peanut butter and jelly. I used to do that when, anytime you write up a disaster recovery plan, you have everybody document their job, you swap books because there's things that people intuitively know, oh, you just hit enter there. That won't be in the book if somebody else doesn't catch that mistake and somebody lets it fly, right? And I think we're kind of at that precipice in this industry where we really need companies to step up and start playing a much more active role in recruiting people into the industry. And it's not just us that work in there. Our HR departments, I think, have got to do a much better job. And then, in a lot of cases, we hire people into this industry from our vendor organizations and from our outside organizations. And there's a churn. It's a very incestuous industry, I guess, for lack of a better term. You go to a trade show, see who's working where now because they were over there last week and that kind of thing. But we have to start bringing more people in. And honestly, I think that this is one area where HR really needs to step up to the plate.
So if somebody's listening to this, whether they're part of an HR group or they're just curious for themselves as an individual or anybody in between, where would you direct them? Maybe they're an operator that wants to have access to a program, but they don't have, they're just trying to get PDUs and whatever built and installed and operating and tilt-up walls going. So they want to be beneficiary of this, but they want to adopt somebody else's program, or they want to leverage somebody else's program, or they're a new person that's interested in investigating this. Where do you have specific places you would direct them? Go to this website, read this thing, follow up in this area, connect to this organization that we can link to so that we can, anybody that's interested, depending upon where they are on that spectrum, can take action?
If you go to my website, carriegoetz.com, there's a resources page. It has scholarships. It has the industry organizations you can belong to, whether they're free for students or not, different events. There's all kinds of resources on how to get in the industry. There's stuff for veterans out there. There's stuff for the trades. I think, speaking to high school classes and junior high classes, definitely, if you have that opportunity and you have kids, go speak to those classes, start raising that awareness much earlier in life. Buy a book on the subject, go to a data center, if you have a scouting group or whatever, see if you can arrange a data center tour. Most data centers will let you tour, even if you can't, go to all parts of the data center, you could at least go get an idea for what it is. But if we not start talking about it, nobody's going to get in this industry.
I don't disagree. Well, Carrie, we've talked about a lot today, and we can either pause here or talk for 2 more hours. I'm all about 2 more hours, but I don't know that my burrito body will allow me to do that. What haven't we talked about today that we should touch on before we wrap up?
I think the one little thing that we should probably touch on is, if you look at the number of people in this industry, we have 300,000 open jobs right now. If every single person in this industry brought one person into this industry, that number would be gone. And, if you're out there and you're a teacher, you're an educator, I talk to classes all the time. I'm happy to Zoom in and talk to classes or teams or, whatever the class has. We can definitely set some of that stuff up. If you know teachers and you want to set up an educator call, we can do that. Most people in this industry are happy to introduce you to other people in this industry that can help with tours and help set up some of that cool on-site stuff. I would also say pay attention to the stuff that's coming out of this National Apprenticeship Program. It's something that companies can adopt themselves to train new employees. It's something that schools can adopt. People can go through apprenticeship programs themselves. All of that is coming online. There's a couple now, but there's going to be more. Think about other careers to get in here: HVAC, electricians, cabling and connectivity. There's lots of supplying organizations, but if you don't understand what's in a data center and how it works, you're going to miss all those.
Yeah.
So do yourself that favor and get at least an overview of the ecosystem and figure out how it works. And if you're an educator and you want to add it to your classroom, there's an educator's reference full of different classroom activities, key takeaways, experiments you can do with the class. The whole idea is really just to ignite people and get them excited. And if it's a kid, get the kid's book. Matter of fact, I've had some grown-ups that bought the kid's book for their kid and said, this is the first time I understood what my spouse did. So there's that.
First time I ever figured out what a superhero was, I had to watch The Incredibles. So
there you go.
It comes in all packages. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate your time. Look forward to doing it again.
I look forward to it too. Hey, if you look forward to that conversation, like the button. And if you loved it, subscribe. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.